Great.
Hey, Angie, I am so
Hello.
thrilled to have a chat about emotional triggers and your wonderful article about managing emotional triggers. Can we discuss a little bit? What is an emotional trigger?
Well, it's not something fun to talk about, but I've learned the hard way that it's really not fun not to talk about it either. And so, yeah, appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit more. An emotional trigger really at its core, I guess, is something small that happens in our life, seemingly small, that creates a large response from us, right? It's something that happens, we interact with, we have a conversation, we see something, we smell something. It can be a variety of things, and it pushes on a fear inside
Mhm.
us, whether we recognize it or not. And then we have kind of what I would say is almost an unreasonable reaction to whatever that small thing was that's happened.
Oh, that's a great summary because I think I read we have thousands of emotions, and emotions are good.
Hmm.
They're good.
Yes.
God created us with emotions. And so I think when we learn to manage them, we really do live free, which we're going to talk about in a second. But maybe after defining this, could you share through the highlights of the story you wrote about how you realized about emotional triggers?
Yeah, so we all have trauma. I had a good friend recently that talked about trauma in our life, and she says we have capital T trauma and small t trauma, right?
Mhm.
Like a lot of us do. And I think all of our listeners, viewers understand probably the difference. And we all probably have had some capital T and a lot more smaller case T.
Yes.
A few of us have had a lot of capital T trauma, but for me, as I was groomed and seduced into a romantic relationship with a high school teacher when I was 16 years old, and that relationship lasted 9 months. And when I became public, when that relationship became public and I spoke about what had happened, I learned kind of the hard way that a predator doesn't only groom his victim or her, but in my case, of him, his victim, but also the community or organization that he or she works in, lives in. And so, even though he had had a favorite student every year for years, the idea that what was really happening to the girls that were his favorite students, the town and that school just were not, at least in that season, able to see. And so they rejected my story.
Mm.
They labeled me a liar. They called me a marriage wrecker. I was 16. He was 39. He had a
Oh my
son. He had a
gosh.
long-term relationship with his wife. I mean, he had a marriage with his wife, and they just didn't want to see that, Mary. And so what happened to me, not only just through that situation, but it spoke to some fear I already had about not belonging. But that situation that happened to me in my life affirmed the negative lie narrative in my mind that the enemy puts in there. Remember, Angie, you'll never belong anywhere. Like that's the key thing that the
Yes.
enemy will speak to me on my brain.
Yes.
Remember, Angie, you'll never belong anywhere. And we all have one of those or some more than those, but
Yes.
ultimately be afraid that no one will accept you, that your voice doesn't matter, that you won't be believed. And so these emotional triggers for me can happen almost anytime I feel like I'm being silenced. I feel like I'm being rejected. I feel like I'm being minimized.
Mm.
I feel like I am not being believed. Any of that happens, it triggers that core fear in me, and I can respond in a way that's really not quite irrational, because I don't want to say, I don't want to bring in that kind of negativity to it, but it seems irrational to me, and it certainly can seem irrational to the
Maybe
people
it
around
doesn't
me.
match
It doesn't
what just
match. There you
happened.
go.
It
Yes.
doesn't go
Mhm.
together.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's because I'm feeling that
Right.
fear of you don't matter. You'll never belong. They don't want you. They don't believe you. Yeah. Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your story is just so helpful. And I'm sure many of our readers can really relate to it, even if it's not the exact trigger.
Right. Hmm.
Because, like you said, we have our own triggers,
Yes.
but we all have that need to belong. That's what
Right.
our core needs. We want to.
Yes.
So I so relate to that part of your story and how that could set off an emotional trigger when you don't feel like you belong. And then yours
Well,
is so much deeper than
yes. Well, and exactly, I was visiting with a friend not long ago who really was, she was getting some late fees on her credit card. And we started talking about that a little bit. She's like, I can't open those statements when they come. And I'm like, well, what do you think that's about? Well, we talked about it for a while, and come to find out, when she was a child, her dad lost his job, and their house was foreclosed on. And it was this time of like panic and fear. And she felt like she needed to try to go to work and save. And like, there was just all this stuff
Wow.
related around finances. And when she got a bill in the mail, even though she had the money to pay it, Mary, it did what I'm talking about. It created this fear in her of something's going to be out of my control. It's worse than I thought. I'm going to be surprised by the number that's in there, right? And so
Yeah.
it's the same kind of thing. So I just say that because, yeah, it's unique for all of us. But ultimately, if we can say, why am I behaving this way? We'll get to that in a minute, I know, but why am I behaving this way? What's this really about? Yeah.
That's so good, Angie.
Hmm.
And that'll go into our next question. When did you learn about triggers? And I think more importantly, how did you learn that they were impacting your spiritual health and your freedom?
Yeah. I tell this story quite a lot, and I almost never tell it without crying. But the real thing that when the Lord used to open my heart to how I was behaving this way and how He wanted to bring healing, because I just want to be real careful about that. When we recognize we're doing something wrong, and I use that loosely, right? Really, that means the Lord is ready to, that He knows we're ready to go to a deeper place of healing. So even though I am still dealing with like shame from some of the ways that I responded to my triggers, I also just want to encourage all of us to know that God's grace is so much bigger than the enemy's voice and the enemy's lie. And
Mm.
he knows how the enemy's trying to scare us into um, like to oppress us. Right. And so anyway, I guess I just want to say that 'cause it's an
To feel
invitation
our
to
freedom,
heal.
really, to
Yes.
live
Right.
free
Yes,
as
exactly.
new
Yeah.
creations in Christ.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
So, so we had gotten home. My kids were much littler at the time, and we'd gotten home from Christmas break, like the parties, that started Christmas break when they were both in elementary school. And I had taken stuff to the school for like the home parties, and they had all these like gifts from the kids that they had gotten, and gifts from the teacher, and all the stuff from their locker that they were cleaning out. And I was bringing stuff in the house, and I was just back and forth, back and forth. The boys were over sugared. They were wrestling on the floor. My house was getting messy. I was pressed to get ready for Christmas, the place that
Right.
we are sometimes, right? And I was just feeling very much the narrative in my head was nobody appreciates me. Nobody sees how hard it is to do
Mm.
all this. They just take me for granted. It's kind of those things, those fears.
Yes.
I don't matter here. I don't have a voice. They just, right? And I'm just back and forth taking stuff from the van into the table, all the stuff to do. And I was already behind. And then the boys were wrestling, and my older son's brand new glasses fell off his face, and they wrestled on him and they broke him.
Ah,
And in that moment, I just screamed at my
it's like
kids,
the
Mary.
last,
I
last.
screamed at them, and I said this things that I'd been saying in my head. You don't appreciate me. You make my life harder. You don't know how hard this is to fix. It was terrible what I did to the kids, really. And they looked at me with fear in their eyes because
Mhm.
I mean, the glasses were broken. It was kind of a big deal, right? But they did
Yeah.
not deserve that. And just
Right.
that silence that fell in the house. And all of a sudden I just felt that sort of wash of like, what am I doing?
Right.
And I went
So many
upstairs.
moms can relate.
I know, we've all
So
done it, but
many
wait, but
moms.
what are
Oh
we
my
do, right? Like
gosh.
it really wasn't about the
Yeah.
glasses, and I knew that, but I really didn't know what it was about. And I went upstairs in our little walk-in closet that I have, and I just laid it. But I said, like, Lord, I don't want to be this mom, and
Mm.
I don't know what is happening, and I don't know why I get this way. Why just the insides just feel like they're just I don't know on fire or something,
Yes.
and I just feel and I just cried out to him, I need your help. And it did not change right away. It's something I still work with. My
Yes.
boys are 20 and 14 now. Just before we recorded this, the dog threw up in the floor, and we were all yelling at each other like,
Oh
somebody get
gosh.
this and stuff, right? Like, yeah, and do it fast and all that. So I have my moments still, even though
Yes.
my kids are so much older. But that began a process where I got more honest about something is going on here.
You
And
had some clarity.
I did. And I asked God, who began to give me some language around how I
Mm.
could recognize when it was happening, how I could come to him in that need, and how I could begin to sort of talk myself through, with his help, of course, talk myself through, address what was really going on, and not take it out on people who it wasn't about that.
That's so good though, because the first step is to be aware.
Yeah.
We can't fix something if we
Yeah.
deny. that it's there. So
Yeah.
I love that you
Yeah.
got clarity with the problem.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
because emotions pull us in, sometimes it's hard to be aware that our emotions are the problem, that we need to take a step back and say, God,
Yes.
what is this?
Yes.
I mean, what?
You said at the beginning, emotions are a gift. They
Mhm.
really are, but they need to be used as a tool that tells us that we have a need that we need to take before the Lord, like so often, right? Like, what is going on here, and how do I need to give God access to it so that He can help me receive what I need from Him? And
That's
not be
good. Give
angry or
God
resentful
access.
or
Yes.
something. Right. Yes. How do I? He's saying something to me. Angie, something's going on in here. Let's see if we can pause and have a conversation about it.
Yeah, that's really good.
Hmm.
So we're going to wrap up with you give us steps in the article, and let's bring those steps to life that have helped you manage your emotional triggers that I think will help other people too. Can you talk about that
Yeah.
for a few minutes?
For sure, for sure. And I have actually a handout that has all these because I'm going to go through them fast. And I think it's linked here
It
also. So if
is.
anybody, yeah, so if
There is a
anybody,
QR code attached in the article.
awesome, awesome. Yeah. So if anybody wants these, you can download it and have them for yourself because I'm going to rattle them off pretty quick. But step one is to recognize. And I use First Peter 5:7 and 8, which says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. Be alert and of sober mind. Your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And so, step one, recognize means when anxiety is rising, what does my body do? Like, what's happening to me? How do I know I'm being triggered? What is my brain feel fuzzy? Is my breath like short? Is it like harder to breathe? My heart's racing faster. I get sweaty. We have like a
Hmm.
physical thing
Some
usually
people
that
shut
happens.
down.
Yes, fight or flight or freeze or, those kind of things. So, can you begin to be in tune with what it's like for you when you're triggered?
That's
Because
good.
you'll see a pattern. You'll see a
Yes.
pattern of what's going on. And then step two is reveal. And I connect that with John 1:5, which says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And the question I ask myself is, what am I believing on the inside about what's happening on the outside? So that's really that access sort of thing that
Mhm.
Jen Hatmaker, she used to say this thing, I'm going to wrestle that feeling to the ground. And that's this part of that, right? Like, what am I believing right
That's a
now?
great visual.
It is. I think it is.
Wrestle
That's
it
why
to
I
the
still use it.
ground.
So like wrestle that feeling and give yourself the space and time you need to do that, right? Like when I was yelled, that's what I did when I went upstairs, when I had yelled at my boys. I'm like, what's really going on here? And I'm like, I'm afraid. Ultimately, we're going to get to the conclusion that we're afraid. The enemy tells us all kinds of lies. But my hypothesis, and I encourage you to test me on this, but my hypothesis is the underneath all of the lies that he'll tell at us and throw at us is be afraid. So if we can ask ourselves, what am I afraid of right now? What am I afraid
Good.
of right now? Because that's
Yes.
why I'm
Fear
responding. I'm
is
responding to
so
the fear.
powerful. Yes, that's
Yeah,
good.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So step three then is remember. And I asked myself the question, where have I experienced God's faithfulness in previous circumstances? I link that to Psalm 145:13. The Lord is trustworthy in all he promises and faithful in all he does. So God's
Beautiful.
faithfulness is evidence all around us.
Yes.
So when I feel the fear, how do I remember to trust? Is it things in my past where I know God has shown up before? I can recall those, right? Is it things in other people's testimony where I can see his faithfulness? I recall those. Places in the Bible where God has been faithful to people. I recall those scriptures that mean so much to me. I recall those songs that I have a playlist on my phone of songs that these are my go to when I'm
So
triggered,
good.
right?
Yes.
So good. This is our toolbox. How do I remember God's faithfulness in this place of fear? And then step four is receive. This is a tough one, I think. How is God offering his presence in this experience? And I link this to John 14:27. Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do
Mm.
not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. And the reason I say this is a tough one is because we got to stay in that pause place, that sort of triggered place,
Yes.
feeling the fear, telling God the fear, remember his faithfulness, and give him time, not because he needs time, but because he knows we need time to speak to that fear, right?
Oh,
I'm going
good.
to
I like
breathe
that.
in, have
Yes.
some breathing exercises. I do this thing where I breathe in, I am, and breathe out, loved. I am. loved. And I do that like 4, 5, 6,
That's
7 times. Sometimes you got to stay in that place for a minute or breathe in a scripture. It's so important, especially when we begin to recognize if this happens to us very often. And those of us who have trauma in our background, this happens. It happens, right? And so what are some of the things that I know I'm going to do when this happens so that I can sort of like re-regulate myself? I'm not a therapist. I've had lots of therapy. I'm not a therapist, but there are also some things where you can like I have this thing where I like hold myself on my shoulder and then the other place under my arm, and you just kind of do this gentle squeeze. It helps regulate your emotions again. And you can breathe in. And again, that's just a way that the
yeah,
Lord, it gives him
they're
space
tools. They're
to,
tools.
right.
We
Yeah. It
gotta
just
have
gives him
to.
space to help you respond. Because ultimately, my responses were damaging my relationships.
Yes.
They were making me not safe for my kids or my husband, and I that had to stop, you
Yes.
know? And so what did I need to do? So and so find your toolbox. And then step 5 is called repeat. And I link that with Lamentations 3:22-23. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness.
Mm.
And the question I ask myself is, how do I offer myself grace in this process? Right? Because we are imperfect people. Some of us, hard things have happened in our lives, and something's going to set us off, and we're going to act before we realize it. But the more we practice something like this, you know,
Yes.
for me, of course, that day, this didn't all like just trickle in so neatly in my life. You know, I learned this
Right.
over a period of time. But as I practice it, how do I give myself grace and connect to God's grace for me, knowing that he loves me and he's going to help me through this every step of the way.
Mm.
So
That those are just great tips.
good. I'm glad
So
that
glad
they,
you have that in a written
yeah,
form.
I'm a very practical kind of gal.
Yeah, I just love it because if anyone, all the scriptures, if you just scan that QR code, you can have access to that
Yeah.
and just keep it somewhere. And if you get stuck in a step,
Yeah.
or if you need to rebuild your toolbox, because
Yeah.
sometimes I need to rebuild.
Yes.
You know, I'll
Yeah.
be coasting and then something will happen. And like you said, a fear will come on me. And I'm like,
Yes.
okay, this has happened before. Breathe,
Yes. Yeah.
remember those scriptures. So
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. And I
Thank
also
you for
appreciate
letting me.
about the resource that's available to the readers. And I hope they stay with us a second more. I want to share who you are so they can find you because you have so many more resources. So Angie's a licensed pastor and she's trained in inductive Bible study through Precept Ministries, which I love Precept Ministries. She has so many resources. She has an MBA from Southern Illinois University. She's the author of 5 Bible studies, and she's the host of the weekly Steady On podcast, which I've been fortunate to be on a couple of times. She's a creator of the Step by Step Bible Study Method and leader of the online Bible study community Steady On University, which is just amazing. I
Thank
don't know how
you.
you do so much, but I'm blessed by your work. Angie lives in beautiful Illinois with her husband Matt and their sons Alex and Josh and their stubborn little Shih Tzu or Shih Poo Jackson. Easy for me to say. I
He's the
used
one
to
that just threw up on the floor.
I used to have a Shih Tzu. I'm saying that correctly. He's incredible. So, but Angie, thank you for these few moments of your time.
Yeah, my
And
pleasure.
I hope, how can people find you quickly? What would be the one way they can get to you and your resources? The quick,
Yeah, the
they
hub is
don't
the
give
website, livesteadyon.com. That's the easiest place.
livesteadyon.com.
Everything that you were talking about is linked from there. So, yep.
Well, thank you. And I will talk to you soon,
Thank
hopefully.
you, my friend.
Thank you for listening.